So in our last video, we asked you guys about your harmonic technique. We gave you a few tips and tricks to consider how to broaden your vocabulary as it relates to harmonic techniques. Well, today, we're going to use a different example and dive a little deeper into two specific harmonic techniques: pedal points in both the bass and the melody, and modal interchange. So before I show you today's example, I would encourage you to check out the last video if you haven't done so already, because some of the things we talk about today will piggyback off of concepts we established in the first video. So today's example will be in the key of D. And just like last time, we're going to start with a simple progression. In our case, a 1, 5, 4, 5 in the key of D. In other words, D, A, G, and then back to A again. Check it out. So let's dive into our first technique, pedal point. We're going to use the pedal point on the bass. We're going to talk about melodic pedal points later, but our pedal point right now will be in the bass, and it's going to be of the tonic variety. Usually when you see pedal points, you're going to see either a tonic pedal point or a dominant pedal point. In other words, a pedal point based on the 1 of the key that you're in, so in our case D, or in the case of a dominant pedal point, a bass note that just kind of stays on the 5th, which would be A in our key. And it's going to create a really cool effect and some different colors in the chords. So in Mapping Tonal Harmony, all I have to do is click on the pedal point icon down here, and when I play the chords now, you're going to hear this static, non-moving bass note underneath all of the chords. So the bass note is going to stay on D. Our tonic pedal point is going to anchor itself into the 1 of the key, D. And then you're going to hear an A over D, and then a G over D, and then back to an A over D, like this. It creates this really cool effect. I had a friend who gave me this analogy where he was like, it's kind of like having an out-of-body experience within the tonal map you're existing in, where you're staying put, but also experiencing traveling through all these different regions. And it kind of got me thinking about like the same thing if you have a drone and you get to see where you're at without really moving anywhere. So there's this really cool effect where it anchors you to this one place while you also get to travel and be around in these other places at the same time. And like we said, it creates some extra cool colors to the chord. Check out our new example with tonic pedal points in the bass. So now let's talk about the other common use of a pedal point in the bass that we mentioned earlier, the dominant pedal point. This is a really cool one because the whole point of the dominant region of our map, or any dominant chord, is to kind of build tension. So with that in mind, what this kind of allows us to do is anything we want, really. So if I'm going to play the original progression with the dominant pedal point in Mapping Tonal Harmony Pro. You hear that static bass note there, and it's kind of like foreshadowing like something's about to happen, because when you root the bass, that's how strong the bass is. When you root the bass on any given note, the harmony tends to kind of revolve around that. And since we're rooting the bass on A right now, everything has like this dominant sort of sound to it. And it doesn't even matter what chord I play. I could do this. Let's go D over A, C over A, B flat over A, G over A, and then it would ultimately maybe, if you wanted it to, it could resolve back on D in just root position. So you can hear how powerful that dominant pedal point is and what it allows you to do with your harmony. So we still have this same sort of effect of being in two places at the same time like we did with the dominant pedal point, or rather, I'm sorry, the tonic pedal point. It's just now we get to, because the function is to build tension, we kind of get to do whatever we want. So we're going to have our original 4-bar progression on top of the A, D over A, G over A, And we're gonna expand it another 8 measures just to show you what you can do just by playing random chords on top of that dominant pedal point, just to show you what you can do and how anything goes when you're using this technique with your harmony. Check it out. Another thing worth noting is these pedal points, tonic or dominant, are great at the beginnings and endings of songs. Let's dive into our next example. And when we do this, we're going to use some of the content from the previous video. We're going to talk about extensions and substitutions and inversions and a 5/7 sus and all that. And we're going to use this to develop even further ideas later on. So one thing to note about our original progression is the way it travels within the map of harmony. And what I mean by that is this: it goes basically from the tonic region to the dominant, to the subdominant, and then back to the dominant. I point that out because our next example, while it's going to sound very different, is going to do the same exact traveling. It's going to have the same journey around our map. So one of the very first things we're going to do is expand how much time we're spending in the tonic region before we leave it. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to start with the D, and then we're going to go to a D major 7 after that. And that's going to keep us in that region, but slightly change the texture and color of the chord. So in the second measure, we'll have our D major 7. And what we're going to do in the third measure, in an attempt to even stay in the tonic region that much longer, is to use the 6th chord, B minor 7. Down here. And then here's where we'll finally venture away from our tonic region into the dominant region. And when we do this, what we're going to end up doing is using an inversion. We're going to use the first inversion of A. This is going to, it's going to create stepwise movement in the bass when we go from a B minor to A over C sharp. And it's also, more to the point, I think, is going to change the color and texture of the chord ever so slightly, where I think it just sounds cool. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go first inversion A right here. Let me get the inversion on. There we go. So to this point, there's our first 4 bars, right? We have a D. Let me play it on the piano. We're going to have a D, and then, excuse me, we're going to have a D, a D major 7, a B minor 7, and then an A over C sharp. Now let's talk about what we're going to end up doing on the last 4 bars. And that is where we're going to venture into the subdominant region just like we did before. But we're going to use a substitution and an extension at the same time we do that. So rather than go to G, we're going to swap out G with one of the other chords that's in the subdominant region. If you remember us talking about this in our last video. And the chord we're going to go with is the 2 chord. Not only that, not only are we going to play an E minor, we're going to extend the chord up to the 7th. So we're going to have not just E, G, and B, but E, G, B, and D, offering yet different texture and color to that chord. All right. After that, we're going to travel back to the dominant region of our map, just like our original progression had us do, just like we did in our original journey. But we're not going to go to A. Let's go to A7 sus 4 for just a slightly different take on the dominant sound and a slightly different take on the A chord, and maybe, I guess depending on your perspective, maybe more tension. I don't know, I kind of feel like it has this potential energy in it that wants to go somewhere else. So I kind of feel like it has some more tension in it than just a regular A chord, but I'll leave that up to you to decide how you want to perceive the chords in your song. And then after that, we're gonna go back to our tonic region. We're gonna go D, D major 7, and then on the 8th measure, we can extend our duration on that tonic region by staying on D, but changing it from a D major 7 to a D6. So bars 5 through 8 would now sound like this. We'd have our E minor 7, our A sus 4, and then we have our D major 7 to D6. So all 8 bars back to back, we have now this. We have D, D major 7, B minor 7, and then the A over C sharp. And this takes us to our E minor 7, Really cool change, awesome sound. And then A7 sus4, D major 7 to D6. Check out our example with the melody and listen for if our new harmonic ideas have informed the melody to do maybe different things, because that's something you want to keep in mind also as you mess with your song or as you write or as you reharmonize. Maybe some of these new harmonic ideas inspire new melodic ideas. Check out our example. All right, so we like that example so much, we're going to keep it around and use it to build off of with these next few evolutions and iterations we come up with. So the very next thing we're going to do is a substitution again, but we're going to do it a little differently. This is a special sort of substitution because to this point we've talked about using substitutions within the same region of the map. What we're going to do now is we're going to swap out the D chord, which is in the tonic region, with a G, which is in the subdominant region. Now, the reason this 1 to 4 relationship is always going to work really well is because we're basically switching from D Ionian to G Lydian. And the cool thing about the Lydian scale is that it has no avoid notes in it. It has no avoid tensions. Anything in that scale can be applied to any of the chords in the subdominant region of the map. We've talked about avoid notes and avoid tensions in the past, so check out the channel if you want to learn more about that. Just note, I wouldn't be able to do this to the A chord because when I think about A mixolydian, some avoid tensions are going to pop up. Some notes in A mixolydian are going to create flat nines and certain intervals that aren't going to sound good with the chord. We don't have that problem with G Lydian. So what we're going to do is see our story from a different perspective. We're going to play our melody that was originally on top of the D chord, the tonic region, and we're going to tell it from a Lydian perspective. So when I play that same melody on top of G, it now has like a Lydian sound to it because we're basing the chord or the melody off of the 4 chord, which is our Lydian scale. And this is going to get us into the mindset of considering chord scale pairings, which we can kind of dive into a little more a little bit later. So now we have our melody again on top of a completely different chord, which is going to allow us to tell our story, like we said before, from a slightly different perspective while keeping the essence of it intact. So in measure 3, we're going to talk about a technique we've used time and time again, and that's called interpolation. So in our previous example, we came across this B minor 7. We have this B minor 7 now in our 3rd measure. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep it. We're just going to sort of displace it over a few beats so we can interpolate or insert a new chord that sets up the B minor 7. And that chord is going to be F sharp minor. It's going to be our 3 chord. And there's a really strong relationship between the 3 chord and the 6 chord of any key. As a matter of fact, you see it in standards all the time when you have this 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 progression. You see that time and time again. And what this is going to allow us to do, or what this is going to create is, well, a couple things. It's going to create really cool movement in the bass. We're always talking about solid bass movement following 5ths and 4ths or steps. And this gives us the former. This gives us this 5th movement of the bass. And it also sort of creates this modalized like 5-1 relationship. 5-1 relationships are always very, very strong. So what we're kind of doing when we go from the 3 to the 6 is creating like an Aeolian version of 5-1, right? We're getting this F sharp minor, which is the 5 of Aeolian, to B minor, which would be the 1 of B Aeolian. So we're sort of modalizing this secondary dominant relationship between F sharp and B minor, even though we're not treating it as such. So in measure 4, in our previous example, we had an A over C sharp. What we're going to do now is use modal interchange and borrow from minor to swap out that chord for something else. So if you remember in the last video, we talked about substituting chords in a region with other chords that exist within that region. And not only can you do that, you can do that if you're in major, you can always borrow from minor, not the other way around. So lucky for us, we are in major. So that means not only is this A accessible to me, I could go with the C sharp minor 7 flat 5, or a C major 7, or this C sharp diminished over here. And what we're gonna do is swap out the A over C sharp with a C major 7. So this is really cool. This is gonna give us that borrowing from minor sound, and it's also going to keep our bass line consistent with the stepwise movement that we talked about before. Because remember, before we had an A over C sharp being preceded by the B minor. So we had this Buddha stepwise movement on the bass. We're still gonna get that this time, only now it's a half step instead of a whole step, but a step nonetheless. So with measures 5 and 6, we're gonna use a couple techniques we've already talked about. In our previous example, we had E minor 7 and A7 sus4. So what we're gonna do is use the extensions technique on E minor 7 and just turn that into an E minor 7 add 9. And as for the A7 sus4 in measure 6, I kind of miss the A over C sharp that we just got rid of and the color that it had. So I'm gonna bring them back into the equation and get rid of A7 sus4 and use A over C sharp instead. And not only that, for the sake of making it something new or different, we can use the extension technique on the A over C sharp and make it an A add 9 over C sharp and have even more texture to the chord. So now if we take what we have to this point in example 5, we would have an E minor add 9, A add 9, and if you remember in measure 7 of the previous example, we just went to a D major 7 that eventually did go to a D6 after that. So what we're gonna do now is substitute out that D major 7 that's in measure 7 with another chord in its region, B minor 7. So what we'll get is a sort of, well, not a sort of, a deceptive cadence by way of doing that. But what if we didn't want to end it there? We have a target now, essentially. We've got this B minor 7 that comes at the end of our deceptive cadence. But like I said, what if we wanted to sort of extend the arrival to this target? One thing we can do, if I change the view of our map to include secondary functions, I can see a great way to target that B minor 7 is by way of its 5 chord, which is F sharp. So now what we can do is this. We can go measure 5 and then measure 6, the A add 9 over C sharp. And in measure 7, we can go F sharp, which would then, it would imply that we're gonna go there next. It creates this tension release. So now that we've got this F sharp chord in measures 7 and 8, let's use our interpolation technique that we talked about before to squeeze in a passing chord between the A and the F sharp that we know we're ultimately targeting. So what we're gonna do in measure 5, we have our E minor add 9. In measure 6, our A add 9 over C sharp. So what we wanna do in measure 7 is do a G add 9 over B. So now we've got this nice parallel movement, a first inversion A, stepping down to a first inversion G, which is going to bring us in measure 8 to our target. So what we've effectively done to this point by arriving to this F sharp is we've basically, in essence, created a half cadence. So while not quite literally a half cadence, in that a half cadence usually targets the 5 of the key by way of its secondary dominant. So while we're not doing that, like we're not targeting A, which is the 5 of the key, we're not targeting the 5 chord, but we are targeting a 5 chord, the 5 of 6. So that's why I say, in essence, what we're doing here, the spirit of what's happening is a half cadence, while not quite the literal definition of half cadence. So all we're gonna do now is embellish that half cadenceness of our progression by preceding the F sharp, the 5 of 6, by way of its sus chord. We used a 5/7 sus in the 6th measure of the previous example, so we're just gonna kind of recycle that technique real quick. And in order for us to do that here, I need to expand our view of the map from this level to our advanced secondary level. So I can see the sus chord that targets our 5 of 6. So now what we're going to effectively have here in measures 5 through 8 is our E minor 7 add 9 to our A add 9 over C sharp to the passing chord we talked about, the G add 9 over B, which is then going to bring us to our 5 of 6, our half cadence, which then will resolve there. So hopefully you're noticing to this point what the implementation of all of these harmonic techniques does to also reinform the melody, what it does to sort of naturally evolve the melody into something maybe you didn't even expect but is awesome and works. So keep your ears open moving forward in all of these videos that we do. If you go back and listen to them again, be mindful of what happens to the melody in these examples, and be open to it also as it relates to what you're writing or reharmonizing. In this next example, what we're going to do is we're just going to change one thing, and we're gonna reharmonize the last chord of the progression that we got to, this F sharp 7 that we got to, by the way, by way of considering our target and working backwards. So just so you don't forget, we got to this F sharp 7 because we knew, or we assumed, we were eventually going to get to a B minor 7. So what we're going to do to this F sharp 7, now that we have it, is implement what's called a sub 5. We're going to swap out this 5 of 6 with its sub 5. So the sub 5 relationship is very strong, and that's because they both share the same tritone. So in other words, the tritone that exists in F sharp 7 that makes it so tense and gives it its identity is this distance between the 3rd and the 7th. So in our case, A sharp and E. Well, if I look completely across the circle of fifths on the opposite side of F sharp 7, I see in our map here, all in purple, all of the sub 5s to the related 5 chords that they're associated with. So my F sharp 7's sub 5 is C7 sharp 11. A7's sub 5 is E flat 7 sharp 11. So we kind of color coded the map so that you can find these sub 5s very, very easily. Another way of finding a sub 5 if you don't have a map or a keyboard in front of you, well, there's a couple ways. It's always a half step above the 1. It's always a half step above the 1 chord of the key, or it's a tritone away from the 5 chord that you're swapping it out for. So there's 2 little shortcuts or hacks you can always use to find the sub 5 of a chord. Anyways, we're going to take F sharp 7 and replace it with C7 sharp 11, which also sort of targets B minor 7. But this is the cool thing about what we just did. By swapping out F sharp 7 for C7, we've sort of stumbled across like a little wormhole in our map. Because if I look over here in the dominant region of the map, I see the same exact chord, the flat 7 we talked about earlier. So in many ways, what we just kind of did, just by asking the question, what can I use instead of F sharp 7? And getting this sub 5 of F sharp 7 to C7, what we stumbled across is the fact that this sub 5 of 6 is actually the flat 7 of the key we're in. So now we're afforded another option. Like, we can go back to the D very nicely. If I want to start the next phrase with the original progression that we came up with, or any of the other iterations that started with D, I now have the option to do so. I didn't really have that option when we were kind of stopping the phrase on that half cadence. That kind of implies very heavily that we're going to go to B minor 7, and almost doesn't work unless we do. There are a couple other options, but the point is that 5 targeted B minor 7. Now that we're using the sub 5, which is really also at the same time the flat 7, I can go back to D very nicely. Or I can still go to B minor 7. So this is it's one small change we made, but it opened up a whole cool can of worms to talk about sub-5s and wormholes within the map and all the stuff that happened as a result of that. So take a listen to this next example, and again, be mindful of the melody. Check it out. All right, so now let's take that phrase that we've come up with to this point and talk about different ways of extending it, or what we can do after what we have. We're gonna keep what we just played for you guys and explore different avenues of concluding that, or what we can do after it. So we just ended on that flat 7, and that sort of implies we're gonna go here, but if you remember what we talked about earlier in the video, that relationship between the 1 and the 4 is so strong, and they're so interchangeable, that I could very well just do this, the C7 to the G. And that kind of moves the progression forward even more, or keeps the story going, because there's no concrete resolution like I would have if I was going to the D after the C. And again, you could do either, but what you're gonna see us do is another substitution. We're gonna swap out what you would expect it to be a D, which would work, with a G major 7. All right, so from there, that's gonna be our first chord, or our first measure of our extension, or our ending. From there, we're just gonna go to the 5 chord, 5-7. Our next measure is going to be B minor 7, but not that B minor 7, not the 6. What's gonna happen here is we're going to use a secondary 2-5. So rather than the B minor 7 that we're going to put here be the 6th chord, I'm actually going to treat it as a 2 of 5. You can always see the 2 5s of any related chord on the map like this. There's always this subdominant, dominant, tonic sort of movement or triangle, and we have all these mini maps all over the place to indicate that. C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7. That's a 2-5 of B flat 7. Let's go to the 2 chord, F sharp minor 7, B7 flat 9, E minor 7. There's a related 2-5 of E minor 7 of the 2. So that's what we're doing here. We're using a secondary 2-5 to approach the A7, the 5 chord. So it's easy at first glance to see that B minor 7 and assume it's the same function as the other B minor 7s we've used to this point. But because of context, because of targets, because of where we're going, it's really a 2 of 5 that then goes to the 5 of 5, 2-5. So here's what we have to this point. G major 7, A7, B minor 7 to E7. Now I said we were targeting the A7, but I think what we're going to do here is something different, something called a cadential 6-4. So that on our map is right here, D over A. It's basically the 1 chord over the 5 chords bass note. That's how you get a cadential 6-4. It's basically an inversion, all right? So you have D in 3rd inversion. Nope, 2nd inversion, excuse me. So now we have G major 7, B minor 7, I'm sorry, G major 7, I know this is getting a little bit much here, A7, B minor 7, E7, D over A. There's our cadential 6-4. So this cadential 6-4 right here, again, is always the 1 chord in 2nd inversion, and it always anticipates the 5 chord of the key. And that's what we're doing here. We're using this cadential 6-4, but we're not gonna go to the 5 chord, at least not right away. What we're gonna do is go to this A7 sus4, and furthermore, we're going to implement the previously used technique of modal interchange and make this an A7 sus4 flat 9. And we did that from by way of borrowing from minor. Anytime you see a flat 9 in a chord, you are basically implying a minor essence, or that you're in a minor key, or that you're targeting a minor chord. So having said all of that, which was a lot, I know, check out our newest example. So now I want to show you a slightly different take on that previous example. And we use this as an opportunity to talk about the Neapolitan 6, which is something that's not well known by a lot of people, so bear with me. And this is also, another disclaimer, is going to kind of give us a bit more of a classical sound, which is kind of out of character for the piece at this point, but it's going to work anyways. And I just want to use this as an opportunity, like I said, to talk about the Neapolitan 6. So we're going to keep the first 4 chords of our previous example alone, G major 7 to A7, and then our secondary 2-5. What we're going to change is what we do after that. This is where we're going to implement our Neapolitan 6. And let's switch the view of the map to functional so we can see more clearly. Yes, the N6 right here, that's our Neapolitan 6. The name comes from, a Neapolitan 6 is essentially a minor 4 chord with a flat 6. So if I relate that to our key, I would have the 4 chord as G. That would give us G minor. The flat 6 is E flat. So now what it looks like I'm doing is essentially an E flat in first inversion. I have G, B flat, and E flat. So in our key, a Neapolitan 6 would be an E flat over G. And most importantly is that it always wants to target the 5 chord or the minor 5 chord. And as you can probably see, based on the fact that all these chords, the Neapolitan 6 and the chord that it targets, are on the inside of our circles, it's very much a function of minor. Remember, everything on the outside of our circles in the map is for major, and everything on the inside is for the parallel minor of the same key. Let's go back to the, let's get rid of the functional view real quick and see the map by way of the names of the chords so I can see what we're doing here. So again, our secondary 2-5 is going to stay intact. We're just going to go Neapolitan 6 here, which, like I just said, wants to target our A7 flat 9. But what we're going to do before that even happens is get to it by way of another cadential 6-4, but one of the minor variety. So now D minor in first inversion, or D minor over A. And then that's then going to go to A7, which then uses another technique I forgot to mention. After that, we're going to go to a D major 7. So ending a minor phrase or a minor song or a minor idea with a major 1 chord. That's called a Picardy third. So this is, like I said, this has a lot of classical implications. The Neapolitan 6, the cadential 6-4, and then the use of a Picardy third, all very, very much classical. And like I said, slightly out of character for the song, but important to talk about nonetheless. These are tools, they exist. We should all know that they exist. That way we make deliberate choices. So having said that, check out our newest example. All right, so now we have our evolved progression. We have a bit of an extension. Now let's wrap it up with an ending. And let's use a pedal point again. However, this time we're going to use it in the melody. So you won't see it in the bass, you're going to hear it and see it within the melody that's played. Before we play it, let me just go through the map and play the chords that we've come up with for our ending, and talk about, as I play the chords, what technique each one of these chords represents. So it's all going to be stuff we've already talked about either in this video or the previous one. So we're going to start our ending with the 1 chord, the D, and then we're going to go to A flat 7, sharp 11, which is the sub 5 of our 4 chord, G, which is the next chord. Our next chord we're going to achieve, so there's our sub 5 technique. The next chord we're going to get by way of borrowing from minor, and it's going to be our flat 7, C7 sharp 11. That's going to take us back to the D chord again. All right. Here, the next chord we get again by borrowing from minor. We're going to get a flat 6 chord, B flat, major 7. And from there, we're going to go to the flat 7 again. We're going to borrow from minor. This time, though, I want to use a major 7 chord. So we're going to consider the chord scale pairing. We're still borrowing from minor. I'm just changing the notes that inform the chord. So again, we have flat 6, which comes again from borrowing from minor. The flat 7, more borrowing from minor. And rather than go directly to the one right here, we're going to borrow from minor one more time to get our flat 2, E flat, and then culminate on our 1 chord. So while we're using a lot of the techniques that we've talked about over the last 2 videos to get to these chords, they were not picked at random. They all have one common thread, and that is they share the tonic pedal point that we're putting in the melody. Every single one of these chords, or at least the scales that inform them, have a D in them. So that's why this works for this technique that we're talking about, the tonic pedal point in the melody. Check it out. All right, so there you have it. Hopefully you have a clearer understanding now of some of these harmonic techniques that we've been talking about. Substitutions, extensions, pedal points, tonic or dominant in the bass or in the melody, borrowing from minor, and considering chord scale pairings to inform not only the harmony, but also what that does to the melody. So thanks again for watching. We always hope this is helpful. If you think it was, hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell to stay up to date on current content, and share this with your friends. It really helps us out a lot. Thanks for watching.